Todd Mackover, and I'm really happy to see you all here today for what I think is going to be a wonderful presentation of ideas and music. It's a real pleasure to welcome Jennifer Walshe here today. Jennifer is one of the most interesting composers and musical thinkers active today, I think. She's a professor at Oxford, started out, she's from Ireland, did her first training at the Royal Scottish Academy in Glasgow, and then did her doctorate at Northwestern in Chicago. She has a list of grants and prizes and commissions and performances worldwide that's too long for me to cite here, but it's quite remarkable. She's a vocalist as well as a performer, and kind of after Media Lab Spirit, certainly my spirit, she's explored as broad a range of what music means and how it can be produced and what elements can be put into a piece of music of almost anyone I know. She's written music that incorporates dinosaur bones. Pat, I thought you might like that. She's done operatic pieces that are performed by Barbie dolls. She's explored AI in really unusual and interesting contexts, part of which she'll talk about today, and has written pieces with really a broad range of styles and ideas. Piece called Grupat, which has a piece of music and also a book that goes with it, in which Jennifer has 9 different alter egos that she all plays herself. A piece called Late Anthology of Early Music, which I think she's going to give us an example of, where she takes music from the Middle Ages and early Renaissance, some of my favorite music, and it's almost like a reinterpretation of that music in a dream, an incredibly unusual mashup and kind of dissection. A lot of music having to do with outer space, so a piece called Some Notes on Martian Sonic Aesthetics, 2034 to 2051, which I think she'll share with us today, and an opera called Mars, which has gotten a lot of attention recently, which I think we'll also be able to hear some of. And Jennifer's words about Mars are that it represents, this is a quote from a New York Times article, it represents space colonization, reactionary futurism, proto-natalism, the madness of hustle culture, and the unsettling futures encroaching on her present. She recently wrote a really terrific book called 13 Ways of Looking at AI, Art, and Music, which is what today's talk is going to be based on. And with that, it's really a pleasure to introduce Jennifer Walshe.
Thanks very much, Todd. Oh, this is really live. Okay. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here today. I'm a long-time fan of the MIT Media Lab, and I got to see some of the students' amazing work from the Opera of the Future group, and they gave me a tour, and I saw the clean room. So this is sort of, it's been a fantastic day. So I'm really delighted that I can share some of my work with you at the end of today. Todd asked me to play a couple of examples from some of my earlier work. So I'm gonna start with an example of a short section from a piece called The Site of an Investigation. This was a piece that I wrote in 2018, and when I was writing it, one of my best friends was dying of cancer. He died at 44, and the piece is dedicated to him. And so it was a year when I was thinking a lot about death, what that means, how we process being alive on a planet that may or may not be dying, how we cope with these things. The piece ends with text that I found on a discussion forum where people were talking about Ray Kurzweil trying to make a clone of his father using AI. And what the themes that I've been interested in since 2018 are already present in this piece, and I can thread them through to today, in that 2 of the big themes of the piece is to do with AI and to do with Mars and space exploration. So I apologize for the fact that many of you have heard the first 10 seconds of this section of the piece as we tried to troubleshoot the sound problems. And as I said to Todd, it's the great leveler to come to MIT and see we're still struggling with Zoom. It makes me feel much better about my struggles. But this is a section in the piece. The piece is half an hour long, or over half an hour long. I'm the soloist in it. I move around inside the orchestra. And this is a section where I'm sort of telling a story. It's a sort of it's sort of like almost like a short piece of flash fiction about AI. And this sort of gives you a sort of a taste of how I'm interested in thinking some of these things through. So I'll just play you this section now. There's an artificial intelligence which makes Jackson Pollock paintings, you know, the splatters. So now you can buy new Pollocks which he never painted, paintings the AI has extrapolated from the pre-existing data. Because the deal is you can have a Jackson Pollock at home in your house. You can place a small wooden bench in front and sit there contemplating it. You can slip into MoMA on a gloomy February afternoon and hope that the act of looking at paintings, the act of being witnessed as someone who is transported by art, will be enough for someone to notice you and intervene in your life. And there was that one time a stranger took your hand to comfort you. And there was that one time a stranger took your hand to comfort you. Okay. So thanks very much. So I hope this sort of lays out the territory in that I'm interested in thinking about technology, but also interested in thinking about how it impacts on the individual human, how we develop emotional relationships with these different aspects of tech. This piece goes on, and you can watch it on YouTube. Whoever did the documentation sort of at times, as you can see, focuses on other members of the orchestra who are doing nothing and then cuts back to me as I'm counting bars of rests and stuff like that. But the whole documentation is on YouTube if you want to watch it. But as the piece goes on, I talk about Mars. Some of the text is taken from NASA's Horizon Goals document about their Horizon Goals for visiting Mars. And we end up with this sort of meditation on death and AI and what that means. And it was really fantastic when the students gave me the tour of the lab today and they talked about the concept of teleabsence that one of the departments is looking at. And I felt, oh, this is right on the money. Fast forward 7 years and I wrote an opera called Mars. Mars was the product of multiple different pieces. So I can tell you, as students, never do what I did, which is make an hour-long musical theater piece called Mars 1, and then a few years later write an opera called Mars. It's just way too confusing. So use really good names for things that are really clear. But Mars 1 was an hour-long music theater piece. It was written for Klangforum Wien in Vienna, and we had video, we had singers. Everybody was dressed like they were in a NASA clean room, wearing dust suits and things like that. And we had robots on the stage. We tried as best as we could to measure the traversal paths that the different rovers on Mars take each day and measure them out on stage so that you could see how little distance they actually travel and have little robots moving around during the performance. After that, I wrote another piece called Some Notes on Martian Sonic Aesthetics 2034 to 51, which was sort of a piece like a science fiction film looking back from the future about what happened to music when it went to Mars, what happens to human music when you put it on a planet that doesn't have either the gravitational force or the atmosphere to allow it to function the way that it would on Earth. I was interested in doing those pieces because, and making multiple pieces about Mars, because after the pandemic, I felt very much I was sick of doing huge projects and sort of going from one huge project to another. And I wanted to have one territory that I spent a lot of time really digging down deep into. I had already started talking about Mars. I'd already been doing stuff to do with AI, but I wanted to have a large period of focus, which led to this opera called Mars. Now, the opera was written in collaboration with librettist Mark O'Connell, who's actually a journalist. Mark is Irish also. He wrote a book called To Be a Machine about transhumanism. He writes a lot for The New Yorker and The New York Times and The Guardian. He writes about tech and Silicon Valley. And so Mark and I had spent the last sort of, I would say, 5 or 6 years tracking different ideologies we saw emerging in connections, sometimes with Silicon Valley, sometimes with Dime Square in Manhattan. You know, sort of we were watching what was happening around transhumanism, around extropianism, these different sort of ideologies that might not be on everybody's radar. And we were trying to extrapolate what might come out of those. And so we ended up with an opera, and the plot of the opera is that 4 female astronauts are sent to Mars. They're not going to be the first people to land on Mars. There's already people there. The first half of the opera is very hopeful. They're on the spaceship going to Mars. They're, you know, the biggest thing they have to contend with is boredom, being separated from their families, and the fact that they left the USB with the Criterion collection on it back on Earth. So they only have Real Housewives and Shrek the Third to watch. You know, and they're sort of contemplating what it means to leave, what it means to never see their families again, potentially. But they get through it. And towards the end of the first act, they discover that their intragovernmental cooperative mission has been bought out. It's been the subject of a hostile takeover by a company called Shadowfax Ventures, which is helmed by billionaire Axel Parchment. And that now they're not going to build a commune on Mars, they're going to build a colony. And part of the remit of that colony is to produce as many babies as possible. So I'm just going to show you a brief clip from the opera. This is the scene when they're, well, it's crossing from one scene into another. So you'll see sort of the last 30 seconds of this sort of scene, we used to call it montage, where they're in zero gravity and they're trying to get into their suits because they're coming very, very close to Mars and they're going to be descending. And they're singing JFK's very famous statement, "We choose to go there because it is hard," as they're doing this. So there's this real sense of, you know, communality and shared mission and purpose. And as they begin to descend, a message comes in to tell them that their mission has been bought out. And this is a moment of, you know, crisis as they're starting to descend over Mars, and they're getting these transmissions from Axel Parchment are finally coming in on the system. So what you'll see is them trying to move from a sense of zero gravity into trying to move into a sense of gravity acting on their bodies as the spaceship starts descending. At the same time, Axel Parchment, who is represented by AI Slop, starts blasting in at them, coming in across. So the singers are sort of both singing, they're also being Axel Parchment live. They use an iPhone with a filter on it so that we can project video of Axel Parchment. And they're managing what's called the Sonic Workstation, which is something I invented, which is simply a collection of the sorts of pedals and vocoders that you'd find in a free improv venue, so that we could bolster out the set design with actual ring modulators and things like that, that the singers could live manipulate their voices. So I'll just play you a couple of minutes of this now.
All systems nominal.
We are T-6 for landing on Mars.
Is that a joke? Sally, what? No, it wasn't.
Arabella! Arabella! Arabella, what's going on? Arabella!
What the fuck was that?
Arabella, repeat!
A message now?
Look at the system. Look, who is it from? It's from
him? It's from parchment?
Then just play it. I can't fucking concentrate. Just fucking play it.
Hello, new colonists. I'm Axel Parchment, founder of Shadowfax Ventures. I wanted to touch base with you as you begin your approach to Mars. The colony is now under new ownership. You are
This isn't commune. It's not like we're the Brits.
After several months of negotiations, Shadowfax secured a buyout of the mission, and we've wasted no time in beginning to implement our exciting vision for the future of the colony and of humanity itself.
We stand on the threshold of a new world, a new civilization of a capitalism finally unencumbered
By the inefficiencies of democracy.
as we spread human life throughout the solar system, and eventually the galaxy and the universe, we can no longer afford to would
Mediocrity and to stifle innovation and progress.
Just play it. Just play the rest of it.
on Mars, indivisible is sovereign. This new colony will not be a extension of Earth's old democracy. It will be a place for the brightest minds, the boldest leaders, and innovative thinkers.
It's so crystal clear what he's going to do.
T-3 to landing. What? Weather looks good. How? Telemetry. It is going on. Mino is broke. The future is under new ownership.
They do make it to Mars, so I'm telling you that. And I would just also like to say for the record that the New York Times said it was full of anti-British jokes, and there was only one, and you saw it there. So I just want to say, for the sake of accuracy. So this sort of shows you the territory that I'm interested in. I'm interested in thinking these things through, not just from a sort of non-fiction perspective, but within stories that sort of locate them within characters and things like this. Whether it's this idea of somebody wanting to make a Jackson Pollock so they can remind themselves of a time when they were in the Museum of Modern Art and a stranger talked to them, or the idea that you know, that sort of these sort of movements of capital, these sort of repositionings of power have real impacts on real bodies that are traveling to another planet. So I'm going to switch over now to this presentation, and I'll play from here. Because what I'm going to talk about now is how some of these ideas came together through some of the projects that I've made, and also within the context of this essay that I wrote. So for the students, just to know, this essay, 13 Ways of Looking at AI, Art and Music, while you can buy it as a book, you can also read it for free online. So you don't need to spend your money. But for those of you who would like to buy a book, you can easily do that. This essay came about from a lot of different projects that I'd made, and through me feeling as a practitioner, as somebody who makes art, who makes music, that I needed to write my ideas down. So it really is the product of all the projects that led up to doing this, and me trying to think these things through. So I want to talk to you briefly about some of these projects that I've been working on. I've been doing projects working with AI in a variety of different ways for about a decade now. One of the earliest projects that I started working on was a project called the Text Score Dataset. Now, this project, you could do it in a lot faster time now, but it took us a very long time to get it off the ground. I'm a big fan of Fluxus text scores. I sort of regard them almost as like the folklore of the avant-garde. They're what you're raised on. They're your sort of fairy stories. Books like Yoko Ono's Grapefruit, or early text scores such as Lamont Young's Anthology 1960. And so when I first became interested in working with machine learning, I thought it would be really interesting to collect a data set of text scores and then be able to train an LLM on them and generate new scores that could be read, that could be performed, that could be witnessed as audience members. And this was incredibly labor intensive. I collected over 3,000 different text scores, ranging from Fluxus right through to today. This was a very, very messy data set. It ranged from PDFs that you couldn't easily extract the text from, through to JPEGs of badges in a museum exhibit that had a text score on them, that the only way to take that data out and clean it up was for a human to decide what to keep and what to discard. What was very interesting for me was that at every single level within this project, we had to think about what we were losing, what we were, by making a TXT version of all of this data, what we lost, what we disregarded in the process. My assistant, Ragnar, who typed up a lot of these scores, he came up with this concept of data relations and data care, and what it means to care for data, because we were doing it literally one score at a time. This wasn't an automated process. What was really interesting was that we were able to take this data set, and when we had created it, I printed it out and had it bound in volumes because I wanted to see physically what it looked like. But we were also able to analyze the metadata. We could do a lot of textual analysis. So for example, in our corpus, the word that appears the most across all of the text scores is the word sound, which occurs 1,745 times. So it was interesting to see how these sort of different parts of vocabulary cropped up. What we were interested in was, instead of treating LLMs as something that's non-neutral, but to try to interrogate different LLMs. So we used char RNN, or Word RNN, we used GPT-2, GPT-3. Microsoft gave us access to Turing NLG, and so we would try to get completion of certain key phrases across all of these different networks and see what the idiosyncrasies of the different networks were. Now, this is a project that because I committed over 3,000 counts of copyright infringements to make this data set. If you go to my website, you can download, there's a booklet which has lots of the scores in it. It shows you these, what I called varietals, which are these different outputs from different LLMs. There's loads of text scores that you can perform, and it's all licensed Creative Commons, because I felt I had to sort of not copyright something which I didn't feel I'd earned the copyright for. But it was a project that was it took us a long time to do. It was very labor intensive, but it was a very important project for me because it showed me the amount of labor that's done. As I said, most of this labor is now automated and could be automated. You could probably get Claude to do a huge amount of that text extraction that we did, but it gave me a sense of like the raw labor that's at the core of any data set that you create, the compromises that you make, and even the moral or ethical compromises you might make, thinking, you know, is it okay that I collected all these scores and you know, collected them together? There's been lots of performances of it, material from the project. There's a lot of different material has been exhibited in different museums, and every time we have to put those volumes inside a sealed cabinet so people don't open them because of the fact that it's this data set of material I didn't ask permission to collect. Another project that I'll mention here is a late anthology of early music, which Todd mentioned. This was a project which has its roots in 2018, and shout out to Boston-based duo Databots, who I had got to know their work in 2018. This was back, we say in Ireland, there's a famous novel called The Poor Mouth by Flann O'Brien, where somebody says, I spoke Irish before it was profitable or popular. And so this was back in the days where AI didn't seem particularly profitable or popular. And I emailed Databots. I'd seen their work online, and I just said, your work looks really interesting. And they wrote back and said, hey, we just checked out your work, want to do something. And so I sent them a corpus that I had, which was solo recordings of my voice, all made in the context of a telepathic improvisation project. So they were solo recordings of my voice. They were all precisely 10 minutes long. They were made with exactly the same microphone, and they trained their version of sample RNN on these files. What was really interesting to me about this was that I didn't just want to hear the final output when they'd sort of tweaked the model and they felt it sounded like Jenny. I wanted to hear all of them. So they sent me back 841 files, which were the entire training output over 40 different epochs. And I spent months listening to these files, which was listening to the network learn to sound like me. This sort of uncanny thing of hearing the learning process, of actually hearing the switches and the changes between these different files. I integrated these files. I'd often drop them into live sets I was playing. I sort of got to know the material intimately. I saw that nobody ever suspected it wasn't actually me. And then, you know, I was thinking, what am I going to do with these? Am I going to make an electroacoustic piece of music? I could simply do that, but it didn't feel right, and I felt I needed to have a very clear concept to hang it on. And then one day I was sitting in my studio and my gaze fell on the Late Anthology of Western Music. When I was a grad student, I had to teach the history of Western music to very uninterested undergrads. And the most difficult term of teaching it was when you did early music, because they weren't familiar with Machaut or John Dunstable or Palestrina. And so we were told to give the students a very clear narrative, which was that you know, Western music emerges with plain chant, which is a monophonic form of singing, and then you take bits of plain chant and you stretch them out so that they're held, and then you add figurative things above that, and then you slowly end up with things being iterated and made more complex, and then a couple of 100 years later you've got Palestrina. And this, to me, was very interesting because this was a narrative which I could very easily hear in the material that I had been given. So the very first of these, where is my mouse? There it is. The very, very first of these training files that I listened to sounded like this. And the actual file goes on like that for 5 minutes, and I never breathe. The last file sounded like this. I played that to my mother, and she said that she thought it sounded like me over a bad phone line. So I felt that we'd passed the Dolores test, if not the Turing test. But what was interesting to me was trying to imitate these things, trying to make my voice go and make all of these different sounds. So to try to sort of machinize my voice in terms of how the network understood it. When my gaze fell on the Norton Anthology of Western Music, I thought, oh, here's this spine, this story that we tell. And of course, within any canon, we exclude things. We try to emphasize certain things so that the story makes sense. And so I took these 841 files and I projected them onto the history of early Western music. I do have some ancient Greek music, but then we go to plain chant, and we move through plain chant to Hildegard von Bingen, to Periton, right on up through to Palestrina and Victoria. And I sort of tried to use these sort of different key canonical pieces of music as a way to listen to how the voice started to establish itself within this training data, and to use this training data as a way to sort of listen to how these different modes of making music emerged. So I'm going to play you a little bit of John Dowland's Flow My Tears. I do a lot of live sets with material from this project, and a lot of the tracks ended up sounding nothing like the originals, but I doubt you'll agree with me, this sounds very much like Flow My Tears. So I'll give you a play. So that's the end of the first verse. I'm sure you were all in the same place in your head as me. So these projects were very interesting for me to do. They, of course, you could just class them under the broad heading of these are AI music projects, but they use different data sets. They have different goals. There's different ways of sort of managing how the project is structured, the different end results, the different, performance formats or, objects that are produced as a result of them. When I first did the project, it was a cassette, and I felt it had to be a cassette because when I was a student, all the early music came on cassettes, which had photographs of vinyl albums of early music on them. So Yuriko, who did the design, he did some machine learning with early AI, with early music cassettes in order to make the cover. Since then, this has turned into a project that I do a lot of live sets on it, and I'm trying to navigate how my voice functions. Whereas with the TechScore data set, the actual presentation of the data set is really central to that project. So flash forward to 2020, 2022, 2023, and as many of you will have been, surprised to see these developments that we felt were hopefully on the horizon with AI and machine learning all of a sudden jump into the mainstream. And I start seeing sort of hot takes in all of the newspapers about what AI is going to do to us. And everybody always has a very clear response. It's either terrible or it's great. And I'm being incredibly frustrated because I think it's a multidimensional problem, and it's a multidimensional field of possibilities. And so I sort of felt almost pushed by the Times into writing this essay, 13 Ways of Looking at AI, Art and Music. I wrote it over the course of 2023. While I was working on it, I spent a lot of time in a lot of different subreddits. At that point, if you were making images using Midjourney, you had to do it in a Discord server, and there were newbie channels. So I spent an awful lot of time watching people, I have no idea who they were, generating images and sort of tracking what people wanted to generate images of, what they upscaled, what they disregarded, and things like that. So it was my thoughts, but then also trying to sort of see how this grew across the internet. And having done projects like a text score dataset and a Late Anthology and many other projects that I don't have time to mention here, it was very, very clear to me that we needed to think about AI from a lot of different angles. When I was talking about AI with my students, I felt like we needed to have a model that you could analyze pieces from a lot of different, through a lot of different lenses, rather than thinking that it's a one-size-fits-all. So in the essay, I talk about AI as a lot of different things. I talk about it as fan fiction. I talk about it as an energy drink. But the one that I'm going to focus on now briefly is that I talk about AI as a form of companion species. Now, as you can see from the emojis here, I think that AI could either be a nice little teddy bear that brings us comfort, or it could be an assistance dog, which allows us to have access to fields of being that we might not have access to otherwise. And here's where I think musicians have actually been incredibly far-seeing, because I see musicians again and again very interested in how they can interact directly with systems. So, of course, we have these early projects like George Lewis's Voyager, which is a symbolic AI project, which started in 1987 and is ongoing, where George Lewis, as a free improviser, is thinking, how can I have other free improvisers interact directly with this system? What happens for them? What happens for the audience? What does that mean for music? Right through to more recent projects like Voices from AI and Experimental Improvisation, which is a project led by Tomomi Adachi, who's a Japanese composer and performer. And when I was doing my telepathic AI project, I was doing it with Tomomi. So I see a lot of free improvisers really interested in this. And this is where I think it's really heartening, because I see musicians and improvisers as intrinsic to thinking through what are these relationships that we could possibly enter into with these different networks. So in 2018, I did a project with Memo Akten. Memo Akten is a Turkish artist and technologist. He was living in London at the time. I think he's now in UCLA, if I'm correct, or San Diego. Sorry, I know it's somewhere on the West Coast. So I got that much right, at least. But Memo is really, I think his work is just stellar, and it is, I know this might sound like a strange compliment, it is the most stable work I have ever seen in exhibitions. If I go to exhibitions, Memo's work always works, whereas other people, the tablet is cracked, or, you know, the software interface has failed or something. So he really knows how to make incredibly robust systems as well as creative systems. For ULTRACHUNK, I spent a year making videos of myself improvising in order to create a data set. I used the webcam on my computer, and our plan was that I could bring, because I bring my computer with me everywhere I go, I would have a consistent way to film myself. Sometimes I would have a good microphone with me, and sometimes I wouldn't. But at least we would have a sort of a relatively consistent video capture mode. Now, this was really horrifying, and it was before the pandemic. It was really horrible to make videos of yourself for a year. And it's captured all my haircuts and different places I was. But it was also quite strange, because I got a sense of how much labor is involved in making a data set that, even though you've put in a year, you know it's nowhere near what you need. You know, it's a tiny, tiny drop in the ocean, and it only captures this very, very small part of you. And that was an interesting experience. I made a journal for the whole experience, and looking back on the thoughts that I was having, it gave me a sense of how to try to understand the thinking of the network. Like, there were entire days where I was wondering, what does the network make of this? Does it understand that as part of my body or something else? Because ultimately what the network understands that is just a cluster of pixels that are a certain color rather than a microphone. I thought a lot, for example, about what does the network think is happening when my eyes are closed as opposed to open? Does it link certain types of sounds or timbres to there simply being more dark pixels in these zones than light pixels when my eyes are open or closed? The end result of the project was this system called GRANMA, which Memo loved making the acronym for. It was granular neural nets for music and audio, I think it was. But it was a cluster of 6 different neural nets which all worked in tandem. So we took our commission fee and we actually co-invested it in a machine that could run the code without melting, because the computations involved were very, very intense, and I'll talk about those briefly now. So you can see Memo in silhouette there. He was always at the side of the stage making sure the thing didn't sort of go on fire. The way ULTRACHUNK works is I'm singing with the system. It's generating about 20 frames of audio per second, 20 frames of video per second. These are all generated. Nothing is sampled, nothing is processed, but because the network has only been trained on video of me, of course, that's the sort of the language it's going to sort of express itself in. You've got a sonogram in the background. In the middle here, you've got this wave structure that shows the proportion that it's listening to me or not. So sort of how attentive it is. Up the top, there's this sort of barcode, which is continually flickering, which is represents this 100-dimensional hypersphere that the network is navigating for every grain of sound. So it was, it was complex to run. It was very, very interesting to sing with. This is back when there's a lot of GANs, so there's a lot of extra teeth, extra pairs of eyes at times. So it's sort of nightmare fuel. Given it's Halloween on Friday, it sort of seems apt to show this. What was interesting for me was that with ULTRACHUNK, I entered into a relationship with the network in real time, but also in non-real time, because I had to create the data set. So I was creating a data set with the intent of it ending up in this project, as opposed to creating a data set just arbitrarily through making recordings. But I had to work with it in real time live. And when Memo and I were working on it, we talked a lot in terms of like, what are the metaphors that we would use to describe ULTRACHUNK? And Memo really liked summoning and wrangling because those sounds are sort of cool. But after I sung with it live, another metaphor snapped into place for me, which was that I sort of regarded it as a form of companion species. Now, I'm using this term in the sense that philosopher Donna Haraway uses it, that companion species are non-human beings that humans live and work alongside with. So all of us have, microbes living in our digestive system, and with their companion species, we don't control them. We can feed them or we can starve them. We might try to manage them with antibiotics, but ultimately we have to live alongside them or else we won't be able to digest our food. The classic sort of companion species animal might be an assistance dog or sheepdog. This idea that there's a being that you're responsible for, that you have to train, that if the dog bites somebody else, it's your fault rather than the animal's fault, so you have to take care of it. And that's what it felt like to enter into this relationship live with ULTRACHUNK, because ultimately I have I don't think of it as a being. I don't think it's conscious. But the moment that I start performing, I have to regard it in that way. And also, I'm the human in the loop. So I have to think of things like long-term structure. I have to think of like, how do we sort of make something that works dramaturgically over a long period of time? I mean, to be honest, it was like performing with a version of myself that was very high on a drug that I'd never taken, and I've performed with a lot of free improvisers that were very high on drugs that I've never taken. And in those situations, we're like, I'm just going to keep the show on the road and sort of keep it going. So it was very, very interesting. And thinking this through the lens of companion species sort of made me feel more hopeful about these sort of relationships we're going to enter into, because ultimately we're responsible for these sort of networks. And if we take responsibility with them and think of them as things that we can use to extend our abilities, that means we have to take responsibility, we have to train them, we have to understand how they work, but it also gives a possibility for new forms of play. So I'll finish out by playing you, if I can find my mouse, I'll play you just a short clip from ULTRACHUNK. Thanks very much. Do you want to come up, or I don't know? Are you coming up, or do we open it up? I don't know what happens next.
Yeah, I think we have
Okay.
time for questions.
Yep.
And maybe, yeah, you can just
Okay.
maybe repeat questions.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Questions.
Yeah, I liked, sorry, this last performance was really, made me feel really eerie and nostalgic for the time when AI art was cool.
Are you suggesting it's not cool now? No?
But that was really cool. And I was really happy to hear you talk about companion species as well. And I also wonder if, like in that period, as you were talking about AI, we had to kind of take care of it. And that falls in line with this companion species framework from Haraway. But now it seems like the trajectory is more that AI will take care of us, or at least that's what the people who are building AI want to happen. So what do you think that implies? What does that mean?
So you're asking, I'm repeating for the people on Zoom, you're asking, this is, it's very funny because we talk about 2018 as if it's like 40 years ago. We're like, oh, the good old GAN days, when everybody had 3 sets of eyes and stuff. So you're talking about in terms of like a period where we felt we had more, we could intervene in the systems more versus now when a lot of the platforms that are being served to us, we have little intervention within them. Am I paraphrasing that correctly?
Not really. It's
Okay.
It's more that essentially it feels like AI will start taking care of us.
Oh, you mean,
Soon.
okay.
Our place in the hierarchy will be detached and displaced relatively soon. And it's really fast. Like, as you say, 2018, you're talking about AI as the companion species. We're still above it. Quite quickly, we're going to be beneath it, potentially.
Okay, so you're talking in terms of AI taking care of us rather than us taking care of AI. So I would say what's interesting to me is that I do think around 2017, 2018, when there was a lot of people working with GANs, for example, and it was janky and weird and there were loads of artifacts and it was very messy, a lot of the artists I know were really interested in that because they wanted that. They wanted those messiness, they wanted the mistakes, they wanted weird juxtapositions they couldn't predict, rather than something which sounded pristine and smooth and great and things like that. So I do think I've become less interested in a lot of the outputs myself at times because it's becoming too smooth and sort of pre-processed to me. In terms of the idea that AI is going to take care of us, I think it depends how we view our agency as humans. Over the course of this year, I've seen a lot of different platforms have AI wedged into them. So for example, WhatsApp all of a sudden decided, oh, we want to be able to serve you Meta AI within WhatsApp, regardless of whether you want it or not. And so I think always we have a point to make choices as human beings, which most people I know switched to Signal at that point, because they thought, I don't need to use an app that's sort of serving me AI where I don't need it. I suppose what I try to do in the essay is I try to talk about the fact that AI isn't one thing. We often talk about it as if it's one thing, as if it's a monolithic entity, but it's like talking about fire and saying, you know, fire might burn us all down, but fire might also keep us warm, or it might be a candle on a romantic dinner that we're going to have with somebody we love. So I try never to think of it in that monolithic way. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the way you're thinking of it, or the way sort of you're talking about it, is in the sense of like a large company just making decisions for us. And I think we always have choices as consumers. We always have choices as people in the world to decide whether we want to throw in our lot, you know, with a platform that's going to make all our decisions for us, or we try to make those harder choices ourselves. So, thanks. Anybody else? Yeah.
Many questions, but just one simple one. I thought the excerpt from Mars was really moving. I love that.
Oh, thanks.
How does it end?
They find life on Mars.
Repeat the question.
Sorry, how does the Mars opera end? They find life on Mars because they drill for water. They find a huge reserve of water. Finding water means that the colony can be expanded. And as they analyze the water, they find evidence of life. And if you imbibe this life, you get psychedelic visions. And so it moves from there on. Yeah.
I really like the way that you talk about data.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of just trying to understand how I want to formulate this question, but it seems like in these smaller systems, you can curate exactly what the data set consists of. And I've sometimes described that curation process as being somewhat violent and really being aware of what's left out.
Yep.
And I'm curious, like, how you think about that going forward in your new work and such, about that curation of data.
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels like data is such an important thing, you know, in our consciousness today around AI.
Mm-hmm.
And like kind of the idea of some systems having more data than is possible for a human to
Mm-hmm.
even comprehend. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious about how your thoughts on that data curation process have evolved.
So you're asking about my thoughts on data curation and how we put a data set together. I'll show you a slide here. So what I think is very interesting, for me, those projects of trying to curate data for projects, that they taught me a huge amount about what it is to put a data set together. They taught me a huge amount about how you can have what you consider to be a vast data set, but it's still tiny. You could easily see how things overfit, you know, and I could start to see when parts of the data set were being replicated, you know, and things like that. But what I think is very interesting now is I like, when I can, to look at other data sets. So for example, one of the early data sets that was used for classical composition, and this is like MIDI files, it was called Maestro. And it's a very weird data set that has composers I've never heard of in there, and then certain composers overrepresented and things like that. So I sort of like to peek. Lion 5B, which is the data set that's used widely for machine vision training, which is like a data set of 5.85 billion text image pairs. So that's what's running, you know, like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion are running on Lion 5B. It's so big that I'm sure here at the Media Lab you could download it, but us normies, it would just break our internet and then break all the hard drives that we had because it's so vast. And Spawning, which is like an artist project, they developed a portal where you could look inside Lion 5B and you could see what was inside it. It's currently down because they found child sex abuse images within Lion 5B. Because what's in Lion 5B is it's like the internet was spread out on a table and somebody just got a bin and went like this and scooped everything into the bin. So if you search for Van Gogh within Lion 5B, you get actual paintings that Van Gogh painted, but then you get things like gift shop trinkets, you know, which feature Van Gogh images on them. You get Van Gogh coloring pages that you can, if you're stressed out and a hipster, you get a cover of The Little Prince, which has been rendered with Van Gogh. But my favorite two things, you get a meme, Wake Me Up Before You Go, where he looks like George Michael, and you get Let It Go with him as Elsa from Frozen. So to me, this is what's in a data set. Do you know what I mean? It's junk. You know, and I try to remember that all the time, that it's just a weird scraping of the internet. Nobody went through this and said, well, they're memes, so let's leave them in a different folder. They just said this all somehow is to do with Van Gogh. You know, and that's how all that data is collected. So I think whenever you can, it's worth trying to peek into these data sets, which often is impossible because they're proprietary, or, you know, or they're too big to be downloaded. But it's really important to engage with these things, because what some of the companies are collecting on us is the equivalent of that, but it's of our lives. Do you know? It's just random detritus from all different parts of our lives, not just our PhD dissertations, but like a weird post that we made on the internet when we were 12, or, you know what I mean, a photograph of you at somebody's wedding or something like that. All of that is being scooped up. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. It's phenomenal. I'm curious, I mean, you have the different lenses of viewing AI in this fantastic collection. You know, 2 years on since December 2023. What has changed? What are the ones that you feel like are stronger than ever out of the lenses in which you view these? You know, would you update any? Would you add any? Is it still energy drink? Is it still natural? Is it still, you know, nature?
Yep.
That's the one you referred to in this. I'm very curious. So much has happened since the original.
Okay, so you're asking me, how would I update it? It's an essay that's 2 years old, which is like 20 years old in AI time. So definitely there's new ones that I would add, but I think the one that for me holds still extremely strong is that, I mean, there's two that hold extremely strong. One is that AI is fan fiction, because what I see again and again is, like, if I look at the most recent, the most popular AI music on YouTube from the last month is this. A Motown soul cover of Eminem's Without Me, 2 million views. And what I see all the time is the ecosystem of music being completely adulterated, because it's flooded with all of these channels, and I have no idea who these people are. And I try to find out, and I cannot figure out who any of them are. So I look at channels like Masters of Prophecy, which is one of the fastest growing YouTube channels, like 35.5 million subscribers. They've had over 300 million plays this year, which my back of the envelope mathematics is that they've earned between 600 grand to 1.2 million. You know, from this channel, all AI generated music. I have no idea who they are. They're also on Spotify, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a million channels. So I see, you know, people want to make music. They want to make fan fiction music about music that already exists, like Eminem, or Frank Sinatra is very popular, or Ariana Grande. But they also want to make music that didn't exist, like Anatolian psych desert rock, you know, and things like this, you know, and I mean, I'm old enough that when the internet cracked open and you could finally, you know, access Tina Revan or, you know, music that you'd never heard before, it was incredibly exciting. So I could understand the sort of the crate digging impulse. But this is what I see now, is that I can't figure out who any of these people are. I think at least 2 of them are linked, you know, when I try to figure it out, but they're taking up vast amounts of space within the music ecosystem, which means real musicians trying to release music are competing with people who are like putting another album of, you know, Habibi Habas' Psychotic Majun from 1978, you know, out on the internet. So that's what I see, is this fan fiction about music that both does and doesn't exist, and this energy drink aspect, which is just flood the zone with content. In an attention economy, what matters most is that you're producing content. And so those, I think, still hold true. Yeah.
Love your presentation. You know, I wonder based on this, I mean, do we have more AI-generated content? Do we have AI-generated audience to watch all the AI-generated content?
Well, I think like the zombie internet theory would say that's already happening. And certainly with Masters of Prophecy, when you look through the comments, a lot of it seems to be bots. You know what I mean? So sort of, I used to teach at a Hochschule in Germany. I was telling Todd this today, and there was a puppetry department, and we did a symbolic AI project in the puppetry department, because they all got it. You know, they were used to making inanimate objects seem real to people. So I think because a lot of these projects are not projects by artists, they're projects by people trying to just flood the zone with content. When you look into the history of these channels, a lot of them have been channels since 2014 or 2015, and they're just literally throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks and gets engagement. So it's not like a musician who says, I've got this great concept, it's going to be this weird Baroque rap, you know what I mean, and I'm coming up with it. They're just sort of anonymous channels, and then I see that they're using all of this engagement farming and having bots listen to things, and I'm like, the zombie internet is living very well and very happily in these channels. So, and then the problem becomes, how then does a human compete with that? You know, how do they get to that many plays?
Would you sort of consider creating a piece for the AI to appreciate your work?
To appreciate my work, if I could do that, like I could like pay off my mortgage. So if I'd be, no, I mean, what I'm watching now is I'm watching the promise that all of these platforms and the people who made these platforms gave us was that everybody wants to be creative and everybody has the right to make music. Do you know? And I know a lot of people do make music and they really enjoy it. But when you read interviews with the founders of these platforms, what they often say is the first thing people do is make comedy songs about like their cat. Do you know what I mean? Or an in-family joke or something like this. And I see them most being used to flood the internet with loads of synthetic content, which I think a lot of people listen to in the background while they're like studying or writing email or something like that. So I'm sure there's going to be anthropologists who are like looking into all of this, and I want to see the papers they write. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your ideas. I want to ask, bringing it back to the human, do you have any strategies for how to practice imagination when we have all these tools that very quickly imagine for us? Do you have any strategies that we can practice as children, as young composers?
So you're asking strategies for being able to be imaginative when all of these tools are trying to be imaginative for us. I actually think symbolic AI is the future because that forces us back to first principles thinking. And instead of saying, I'm going to let it do it for me, you know, like all the work that I saw from you and other students here today is like so full of creativity and imagination because you're not allowing these platforms to make all the decisions for you. So I sort of feel maybe we've passed through GAN wave, you know, now I'm like doing a totally retro thing and saying, let's bring symbolic, make AI symbolic again, you know, like sort of. No, but I think in that way you're forced to think, what decisions do I want to have made? My collaborator, John Leidecker, he always talks about like what is beneficially automated as opposed to automated that's a decision that we didn't make. You know, so like what would we like to be automated versus what is being automated on our behalf that we might not have a stake in. So I think it's that's sort of my approach now is I'm more excited the more I can be involved in it, you know, rather than it's simply being served to me. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
Okay.
I'll try to. So we had a few months ago we had Paola Antonelli out here, who's a curator at MoMA. She did a lot of their AI stuff at exhibitions. And one of the things she brought up that I thought was very interesting was, you know, I asked her, well, when you have all of this content coming all the time, you know, how do you see value in anything at all? And she was like very hopeful about humans and how we sort of filter through the noise. She was saying, well, we're going to forget all of the slop that doesn't have any meaningfulness in our lives, and instead the things that really innovated and pushed the boundaries of expression, those are going to be the ones that we remember in 20 years and look back at. And we won't look at AI as like this slop thing that didn't have any value to it. And I thought that was very interesting, and so you know, I wanted to hear what you think about that.
So you're saying Paola Antonelli came through and she was saying we won't remember the slop.
I mean, the internet from the beginning has just also been flooded with content. There's so much, as you showed, that is just completely noise, but somehow, you know, the internet still becomes meaningful to us. And when you were generating, there was also a lot of things that were just kind of interesting, kind of seemed somewhat random, but somehow you were able to find some meaning, it seems, in some of the randomness of it. So I'm just curious, like maybe Masters of Prophecy is going to put out something that's going to, you know, be remembered in 20 years because it had a really unique thing in that randomness that
I definitely think so. I have to answer your question on several different levels. So, like, the first thing that I think about is that we live under late capitalism, you know, and so the sort of the framework that that establishes means that we live in an attention economy where, in order to be successful, people have to put out content constantly. So I certainly feel when I talk to young artists, they feel huge pressure, you know, to be constantly posting on social media about what they're doing, to be putting out an album every year, not every 2 years, maybe every 9 months, you know, to try to get the edge. So it means that we're in an environment where it's very difficult for people to make their way through that material. And I do worry that there will be really meaningful work that we just simply don't get to, because there's a wave of, you know, Italian brain rot memes in between us and that material, you know, to get to. I do think slop is not going to go away. I think that trying to navigate slop is the sort of the phase that we're in now. And I do think that I have no doubt that people will always make music. I have no doubt there'll always be musicians, there'll always be music students, there'll always be professional musicians. That's never going to stop, because it's something that musicians do because they love it, you know, and it's part of their identity and it makes them feel more alive. So I have no doubt that that's going to go away. What I do worry is that there's young artists who might not be able to make it financially for long enough to keep going, or to feel hopeful about the possibility of keeping going, because there's channels like this that's in between them and monetization, or them and just simple discovery. I do think that what's interesting is I think that there's going to be a lot of artists who might change the way that they work to make it more adaptable for a sort of a machine learning meme environment, so that artists will think, well, maybe I should release a little model of my style so that my fans could iterate, you know, a Valentine song, you know, in my style. And maybe that will be really cool and interesting, or maybe it'll just be really naff. I don't know. We'll have to see. I do think that there is enough of the AI slop equivalent of popular culture wedged in my brain eternally that, you know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff that gets in there and doesn't ever come out again, do you know? And you're like, why can I not remember my aunt's birthday, but I can remember all the lyrics to, like, the Spice Girls? Do you know? So I think that there's a lot of cognitive space that's being taken up by stuff. I was in a cafe in Ireland and there were 2 teachers discussing brain rot as if it was sort of an intractable mold in the classroom that they just couldn't get rid of. And they were going, oh, there's a new one now. Some lads, they just stood up and said 776. And they don't even care what it means, because it's just something they have to live with on a day-to-day basis, do you know? So sort of these sort of things, like there's an entire generation of kids that slop is going to be a folklore, is going to be like cherished childhood memories. Do you know what I mean? So I'm very curious what the next few years will be like, you know, as we try to navigate all of this. And there's part of me that's really excited about what artists might do. There is part of me that thinks it was already difficult enough to get your music out there and get other people to hear it, and this is making it much more difficult. The last thing I'll say too is that, and I know this is a super nerdy point that I'm going to make, mega nerdy point, but there's a fantastic label called Habibi Funk, and it's a real label. It's a crate digging label of a guy in Berlin who, like, goes to Egypt and Iran and Libya and looks for recordings, and then he looks for the descendants. If that person is dead, he either looks for that person or their family, and he makes a deal with them. And he says, I'm going to release this, and you're going to get 50% of the profits. And people are delighted, you know, because it's like Libyan covers of Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. Like, what's not to love? It's amazing. Habibi Funk is a fantastic label. And when I was listening to Zararet Records to try to understand, there was a specific track where I could hear that they ripped off a Habibi Funk track. And to try to unpick it all, when I played the tracks to my students, I was going, this is the real Libyan funk, you know, and this is the AI-generated Libyan funk. And so I could see it's not just that people are making music, but they're taking, you know, it's a form of Orientalism musically and colonization to sort of say, I'm going to take all of this stuff that people have a fetish about, and I'm going to train it, and the data set is so small that it's instantly going to overfit to the extent that somebody like me can recognize that's ripping off this track. And I wrote to Habibi Funk and told them. So I do sort of worry about things like that. I mean, there's lots of this stuff which is really exciting and funny and sort of opens up great conversations about what's high culture, what's low culture, what should be represented, what shouldn't. A lot of it's garbage. You know, of course we can say the same about the history of art. There's loads of garbage, but I would say that the rate at which garbage can be produced has never been so high in the history of humanity. So get the bins out, put your gloves on, do the community cleanup, you know. Thanks very much. Oh, sorry.